Welcome to Jim's Moving Picture Show, where the popcorn is buttery, the jokes are cheesy, and the movies are scary. Or funny. Or well, it's a all over the place. Jump in as we go on a trip through the best and worst flicks in cinema history. And now your host of the Movie Picture Show, a guy who's seen Jaws a million times, has a zillion movie t-shirts, speaks fluent movie quotes, a guy who really should get out more. Here's your host, Jim Christopher.
And welcome everyone to the first edition of Jim's Movin' Picture Show. I'm your host, James Christopher. You can call me Jim. And you know the show's going to be cool because we didn't use a G. Just got the apostrophe. We don't have time for G's, guys. We have to get into the show. I am passionate about a lot of things. And you can look behind me and see that I'm a big Star Wars guy and I'm a big horror movie guy and I'm really into baseball. And I really enjoy doing our baseball show, but I haven't really found a footing of doing a movie show that I am happy with. And I think this might be the one, in part because I'm just going to take it from the perspective of what would I want to see in a movie show. I don't want to see hot takes, and I don't want to see blowing up fake stories so that way we can pretend to have a scoop. I want to talk about cool movies. I want to have other people on that are going to talk about cool movies. And as the title suggests, we might even throw in a book or two. So the first mission of this show is to talk about Halloween movies, horror films. It is the magical time of year. And I will say that if there has to be a benefit for my Astros not being in the playoffs anymore, they lost on October 1st, it's that I can really dive into some horror films. And in fact, I have now watched, we're on October 7th today, I'm recording this, 20 already. Now you can read that one of two ways. I think it's super cool. But one of the things I love to do is put together movie marathons. I love to discuss movies in certain contexts. And I wanted to have a conversation with a couple of friends, but I thought it would be fun if we, for the Halloween season, we have 4 episodes, lay out our favorite number 2s, number 3s, number 4s, and then remakes and requels and reboots and whatever you want to call it. I thought it would be kind of fun to dive into the movies that came later. We all talk about Halloween or The Exorcist, but we don't really talk about the sequels as much. And I thought horror movies really work as well as any other genre, maybe better as a franchise. I know it's a dirty word, but let's be honest. There's a reason why franchises make money. It's because it's what we want to go see. And I think horror movies have some of the strongest franchises out there. So I am going to share with you my top 10 number 2s in the horror genre. Now I'm going to begin with an honorable mention, which I realize absolutely already ruins the premise of the show by limiting things to a top 10. Why not a top 11, a top 12? But I got to do a shout out to one of the best bad horror movies ever made. And that is I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Jennifer Love Hewitt even has a song on the soundtrack, or I could say it, Jennifer Love Hewitt even has a song on the soundtrack. But now, my real number 10. This was a movie that I saw a bunch of times. I think it was one of those ones, if you're a kid of a certain age, a Gen Xer, you grew up with early HBO, which meant sometimes movies played on a loop and you just watched them over and over and over again. This was like, I was like this with Airplane 1, Airplane 2, but I was also like this with one of my favorite horror sequels of all time, Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2. Prom Night 1, honestly, kind of bores me a little bit. Prom Night 2 is better than it has any reason to be. It's really good, even though in one shot you clearly see the boom and they don't care. But what I love about the movie is it's basically a possession film. And it's a possession film in the guise of a slasher movie. It's fun. They do a lot of playing with the 1950s or 60s now being in the 80s. So if you haven't seen it and you want some B-movie good time, Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2.
This year, someone special is coming back to Hamilton High for prom night. Mary Lou Maloney. Mary Lou. She's been dead for 30 years. Now she's going to use Vicky's body to get her crown back.
Now he wants to be next to me. He's literally right under this. This is what we go through to make this show happen. So please keep watching. A lot of my horror movie friends, I'm in the film business, and so I've got a lot of people across the horror spectrum, but a lot of them think very highly of their own opinion. And they kind of take their opinion of being so obscure and deep and challenged as if to say you aren't. And maybe that's true. However, I'm a lover of cinema. I will try to find something like about every movie. And I also sometimes like studio horror, which means that I really liked The Conjuring 2, even though so many of my friends absolutely hated it. But I'll be honest, I'm all about Catholic religious horror, and the crosses flipping upside down was enough to get me to watch it.
And what's that? Murder? Suicide? Or both?
Alert, alert. We interrupt your program to bring you Daniel Baldwin, contributing writer for the horror website Dread Central. And so, as we mentioned, here is Daniel Baldwin. Daniel, right now we are halfway through my marathon of horror sequels, and I thought, who better to check in with if you got to pick a movie day, a movie marathon of all number twos, where are we going?
Oh boy. Twos are the hardest because there's a lot of good second movies. And many of them are even better than the first ones. I really wrecked my brain on this one. It really hurt to chop my list down.
All right, well, where do you got? Let's go from 5 to 1. How are we doing?
All right, these aren't in any sort of order in terms of preference or quality, but I've got The Bride of Frankenstein.
Also on my list.
Fright Night Part 2.
Well done.
Psycho 2.
Okay.
Hellbound, Hellraiser 2.
All right, what about Hellbound made you grab that one?
It's my favorite of the series.
Okay.
By a hair. I love the original, but I just really love Hellbound.
Okay, and the last one.
More recent, Dr. Sleep.
Okay, so I want to ask a couple of questions about these before we let you run. Psycho 2, I feel like that whole series is better than it has any business being. Just talk to me a little bit about that as our horror guru, about what you feel like how you feel like the Psycho sequels play.
Well, first off, I think it's way better than it actually has any right to be. I mean, we're talking about a sequel to one of Alfred Hitchcock's greatest films of all time. It doesn't have any right to be good, let alone great, but it is great. And I think that's because they picked a great craftsman in Richard Franklin to bring it to life. You got the script by Tom Holland, who ultimately went on to make Child's Play and Fright Night. And it just kind of it leans into Norman. And that's why I think all of those Psycho 2, 3, and 4, all those sequels work well, is because they completely focus on Norman himself as a character, where his mind or minds are at throughout each point. And I think at the end of the day, what really makes those 3 sequels, especially Psycho 2, sing is because instead of rooting for the slasher to chop people up and just butcher the entire cast in front of you at any given moment, you don't want him to do that. You want Norman to get better. You want Norman to have a normal life. And that's all rooted in Anthony Perkins. If they hadn't gotten him back for the sequels, they wouldn't be worth it. But they did, and he's amazing in all of them.
Yeah, it's such a tragic thing too, because as we know, that role kind of ruined his career because he was so.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a promising career before that, and it's one of those things where it's like Mark Hamill in a way, like you're only going to be Luke Skywalker for the rest of your life. Curious though, there are a lot of number twos in the Universal Monster universe, right? The group that did a cinematic universe right before they even knew what that was. What brought you to Bride of Frankenstein versus some of the other, like the Dracula or Wolfman sequels?
It's my favorite of the bunch. It's one of my favorite Universal monster movies of all time. I think Dracula's Daughter is a fantastic movie. And if we really count The Mummy's Hand as a sequel to the first one, it's more of a reboot, but that's a great film. Revenge of the Creature, not so much. And then, of course, I love Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, but then that gets tricky, and maybe we'll discuss that as we go on through this series. But, it's Wolfman number 2, but it's also Frankenstein number 5. So,
yeah. They get fast and loose with the dimensions. All right. Well, he is Daniel Baldwin. Make sure you're following him. We'll have all of his links down there. Daniel, thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for having me.
Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Now, the t-shirt I'm wearing gets us to the correct franchise. We are going to jump into the classic Universal horror movie sequels with Bride of Frankenstein, which I actually find to be superior to the original Frankenstein movie. If you're younger and you haven't given the old Universal monster movies a chance, do it. First of all, they're not terribly long, but you're going to find that these movies are way better than I think you might imagine them being. And I don't know very many people who have watched them and haven't walked away going, I was really into that franchise or I was really into those characters. And it has the benefit, or the curse, I guess, of being the first movie universe before we even knew what a movie universe was.
Friend? Friend?
Now, speaking of a movie and a series of movies really that are way better than they had any business being, you have to talk about Psycho 2. It's about 22 years after the original film. The original film is a classic for a lot of reasons. It changed film. I mean, it really did. You'd be hard pressed to watch a horror movie that didn't owe some degree of debt to the movie Psycho. But when it came to the sequels, they could have easily phoned it in. They came out at the time when the horror franchise, the modern slasher movie franchises were really picking up steam. And of course, Universal is going to want, whoever made the movie, I think it's Universal, they're going to want to cash in on that. And they've got already the most recognizable name in horror movies, Norman Bates. You know, obviously got Jason and Michael and Freddy, but Norman Bates was already known to a lot of people. There was already a built-in almost fear of it. So, of course, with Norman, it was a natural decision to make a film. What was really cool, though, is they set out to make a good one. Here's a clip from the movie, and yes, we got Mother's permission.
Norman Bates is judged, restored to sanity, and is ordered released forthwith.
It's 22 years later, and Norman Bates is coming home.
I won't do that. You can't make me kill her.
22 years later, Norman Bates is home.
Now let's jump into number 6. Now, it has become a bit of a cliche to say that you hate The Shining. And then it's become sacrilegious if you tell someone you hated The Shining. I hated The Shining for much the same reason, actually, that Stephen King doesn't particularly like the movie. I read the book. I love the book. I actually found the miniseries with the guy from Wings to be way closer to the book, in part because Jack Nicholson is Jack Nicholson. There's no character arc there. It literally starts with him being batshit crazy. And guess what? The movie ends with him being batshit crazy. What's cool about Dr. Sleep is he does a good job, the filmmaker, of creating a sequel both to the book and to the movie. And I think you get a really compelling narrative. Ewan McGregor is always awesome to watch. He does a great job of facing The Shining and finding other people that shine. I do think he wished he had his lightsaber for some points of the movie, though.
When I was a kid, there was a place. A dark place. They closed it down and let it rot. But the things that lived there... they come back.
Another one that might get people to roll their eyes is It Chapter 2. I personally really dug It Chapter 1 and 2. Yeah, the sequel's not as good as the first one. The first one to me is almost perfect, but I thoroughly enjoyed 2, and it has survived multiple rewatches. Both movies are now on mine and Jessica's annual Halloween list. It is a really, really well done sequel, and part of it is they did such a good job of the casting. You get really, really good actors, and they do resemble physically their younger versions. And then they did a great job of bringing some of the characteristics from the younger versions in. So I definitely enjoyed this second go around with Mr. Pennywise.
To the losers.
We made an oath.
Swear? If it isn't dead, if it ever comes back, we'll come back to you.
We didn't stop it.
Pennywise.
Alert. Alert. This program has been interrupted. Now hosting is host of the show Gary Talks, Gary C. Warren. And as we mentioned before, we are joined by Gary C. Warren. He is a TV producer and writer, and he is the creator of one of my favorite web series, the ever-growing Gary Talks. He's going to talk music, TV, and movies. But today, Gary, you're on my show talking movies.
Thanks for having me, Jim. I'm very happy to be here.
So the task that I have put to you is your top 5 number 2s. Now, I'm going to give you some wiggle room. You don't have to necessarily have them be your top 5 number 2s horror movies, but what you think might be a good marathon to watch, however you want to approach it. What are your top 5 sequels?
All right, so yeah, I wanted to stick to horror sequels in general, and for me, what really makes me love a sequel is by expanding the world of the first movie.
Okay.
So that's why I think most of these 5 do that in some way. Coming in at number 5 is one that is probably on no one else's list unless it's worst sequels ever made. But for me, because I love it, is The Human Centipede Part 2. That took everything that all 6 of us who loved the first movie loved and expanded it into the real world where a crazed, fat film fan in his underwear tries to create a human centipede in the real world. And as a fat film fan who watches it in my underwear, I was like, yeah, this movie is for me. Coming in at number 4 is in that same torture porn variety, but a lot more mainstream, is Saw 2.
Okay.
First Saw movie, I think, is fine. I think they did a good job for an indie movie, low budget, one location.
Yeah.
But Saw 2, I really love the way that they made this into like a cops and robbers mystery serial killer playing with time. I think it's the best film in the Saw franchise, and I just wish they had delivered more on the world they kind of set up in Saw 2, and instead they sort of just started doing the same movie over and over again.
Yeah, in fact, you mentioned that. I think the franchise lost me after the third one. I just quit caring. I do agree how they increased the world in Saw 2, because Saw 1, like you mentioned, is kind of, here is a perfect independent film. This is what you would tell every no-budget filmmaker you make. Few actors, one location, and get after it. And to see them take that growing popularity and really expand the universe was really cool.
Yeah, I agree too. Like Saw 3, I thought did a good job, but then it just started repeating and repeating. And you know, when you kill your villain off in the third movie, yet he's still the star in all 10, it's now I just watch them to see how they're going to pull that off.
And he's not like Jason, where it's part of the joke that he dies in every one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then I'm just like, how did this guy know to swallow, or like what, he put a cassette recorder inside his colon or something so they would be sure and take it out of his dead body so he could narrate part 5. I don't know. Coming in at number 3 for me is a film you and I have talked about because it is just insanely strange. I don't know how much it builds the world of the first one as much as it just, I don't know, it was like someone got drunk watching the first one and decided to make this one up as they went along. And that was Slumber Party Massacre 2.
Yeah.
I mean, Slumber Party Massacre 1 is a very, by the book serial killer guy has a drill coming after people. And for whatever reason in 2, now it's a completely different guy who's a rockabilly with a guitar with a drill bit on the end of it who breaks into a song part of the way
so
through.
Weird.
I don't know. Like, I saw that one first, and then I later watched Slumber Party Massacre 1 hoping to see more of him. And I was like, what's this? There's no musical numbers. What's happening?
You were very bored. It'd be like if you watch Joker 2 first, and then you're like, what? This is just Taxi Driver without the singing. What's going on here?
He dances a little bit, but there's no songs.
Yeah, that's the kind of weirdness you usually expect from a horror franchise around number 5 when you start getting into musical territory. All right, what is your number 2?
Before they go to space. Number 2 for me is the most recent on my list, and that is Dr. Sleep, which I thought was a great sequel to The Shining. Both the movie and the book, I think that Flanagan walked a really thin line and was able to pull it off, and was just a really great movie.
What's kind of neat is, spoiler alert, that it's on my list and on our other guest list as well. So clearly that connected. And like, I'm not your Shining fan, but I loved the book. And so I still felt satisfied. Like, to your point, it wasn't just to the movie, but it was threading the needle of both things. I thought that was a really well done movie. All right.
Yeah.
What's number one with the bullet for you?
And coming in at number one for me, a lot of people who watch my show know that I always list this on my favorite sequels of all time, but that is Evil Dead 2. I think it's textbook expanding your world from the first movie, as they basically took the first movie and retold that in the first 3 minutes of this movie, and then just made everything bigger and better. And I think it is the perfect horror, comedy, gore movie, and it's one I've loved forever. And I really can't see another horror film, another horror sequel topping this one for me.
Okay, let's stick on the Evil Dead franchise, because a couple of things for me is it's not my franchise. And partly because I did see Army of Darkness first, which is completely, talk about wackadoo. And so then I went back to the other ones and I just didn't get it. So if I'm to revisit, what should I be looking for if I want to check this out?
I mean, for me, it kind of depends on what you enjoy about movies. If you're a gorehead and you just want to see great practical effects, I think that's what you're watching for. You're watching for what someone does with a low budget, some great gore, and just almost like we were saying with Saw, where it's like, hey, you've got one location, you've got a few actors, and use your money on some nice fake blood and some
Cairo corn syrup and some chocolate pudding and get after it.
Exactly. For me, I love the Three Stooges slapstick aspect of it. I saw Evil Dead 2 as the first one I saw, which again, kind of like Slumber Party Massacre to some extent. When I went back then and saw the original Evil Dead, I was like, where are the jokes? Where's the man fighting his own hand? Where is all this over the top stuff? So for me, that's what carries it. And knowing that Sam Raimi just wanted to torture Bruce Campbell and came up with ways to try to hurt him throughout the film makes it even more fun.
Where's that joke when we talk about whether he's talking about whether his girlfriend's going to sleep with somebody else, when she said, "Oh, it's High Fidelity." If somebody said you haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet, what are you talking about? That's how my brain works. I know you get it. All right, Gary, we will be back next week to get your number threes. Thanks for jumping on.
Sounds awesome. Thanks for having me.
I'm sorry, Rob, I'm struggling here. You're asking me what would I think if you told me you hadn't seen a film that you have already seen. What am I supposed to say?
Just listen to me. If I said to you,
I haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet, yes.
Would you get the impression that I really wanted to see it?
Oh, well, you couldn't have been desperate to see it, otherwise you'd have already gone.
Right, I'm not going to see that movie.
But the word yet. Yeah, you know what? I get the impression that you wanted to see it, otherwise you'd have said you didn't want to go.
Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. So here's the deal. I'm a Catholic, proud Catholic. I've been a Catholic when I was born, probably will be a Catholic when I die. Things that have always weirded me out were Mormons. I've always thought the preacher that knocks on the door, that's a strange cat, man, and I wanted really no part of it. That made me perfectly set up for the horror that is Poltergeist 2. Because if you weren't creeped out by the Reverend, I don't know what it says about you, but it certainly says something.
You're gonna die in there! All of you! You are gonna die!
And now to the top three. I'll get a prop for this one. It's my Laurie Strode all-in hospital getup, because it is Halloween 2. I love this sequel so much. Yeah, it's very different than the original film because they had money this time. And yes, they introduced the Myers, Laurie Strode brother-sister thing, which so many people hate. I personally really like, but I get it. That's why it's problematic for so many people. I love that it begins on the exact same night as the first one ends. It makes it essentially so much more mayhem happened. And I think you got some really creative kills and some really great performances. And it really cements Jamie Lee Curtis as the Scream Queen.
What's this?
It's gibberish. No. It's a Celtic word. Samhain. It means the Lord of the Dead.
Number 2, with a bullet or a hunting knife, is Scream 2. In my life, there have obviously been lots of movies that I felt that there was a cultural anticipation for. Right around the same time, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm getting older, American Pie 2 and Scream 2 came out, and I cannot remember a time when you had two movies that people were so excited for than those two. Scream 2 didn't disappoint. One of the scariest cold opens of the series. And what I love about Scream, I would make the argument that it is top to bottom the most solid of all the horror franchises because not a one of them sucks. So Scream 2 should definitely be on your marathon.
Stab 2? Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.
No, wow.
Come on, man. Oh, please, please. By definition alone, they're inferior films.
It's bullshit generalization. Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Oh, yeah?
Name one.
Yeah.
Aliens, far better than the first.
Yeah, well, there's no accounting for taste.
Thank you, Ridley Scott rules. Name another. No. Aliens is a classic, okay? Get away from her, you bitch. I believe the line is stay away from her, you bitch. It's film class, right?
Last but not least, is it a horror film? Is it an action movie? I don't know, but Aliens is my number one horror sequel. I figure you got big monsters eating people. Not even eating, like bursting stuff out of their chest. It's even worse than eating. I mean, at least eating, as you're going down the gullet, you can think to yourself, well, I'm providing nutrients. I guess you're providing a womb in your chest cavity for the other things, huh? We should really dive into the philosophy of that. But you absolutely have to check out, if you haven't seen it, Aliens. And I know this is an Alien versus, or Godfather, Godfather 2. I'm with the sequel, with Aliens, and with the first one, with The Godfather.
Get away from her, you bitch!
That wraps up the first episode of Jim's Movin' Picture Show. We're going to be back next week when we're going to talk about, because we're really creative here, a movie marathon based on our number 3s of horror franchises. Thank you so much for Gary and Daniel for coming on. We will see you next week. Until then, act to the cut.